It is that time of year. It is Oscar season. Every year, when this season rolls around, I review films that have either been nominated at the Academy Awards or have won Academy Awards. It doesn't have to have actually won the award to qualify. Now, it's a little late, but I'm actually going to try to do 3 films this year. An older one today, a more modern one, and hopefully one that was nominated this year. I decided for the first one this year that I'm going to do an oldie, and I decided to pick The Time Machine from 1960. This one kills 3 birds with 1 stone, technically. 1, I am a fan of science fiction. 2, I'm a fan of time travel as a plot device. And 3, I'm a fan of the golden age of Hollywood cinema. So this was a natural fit. The Time Machine, directed by George Pal, is a film from 1960, and it is adapted from the H.G. Wells novella from 1895 of the same name. Even though I have a copy of it over there somewhere, I have not read it. But from what I've gathered, this film is actually pretty faithful to its source novel. There's only like minor changes, and most of them are towards the end anyway. The plot of the film picks up in the year 1900. Our main character is an inventor named H. George Wells, played by Rod Taylor. He has invented something he has called a time machine. He shows off a mini version of it to his friends, even showing that it can go into the future. Though since it's a mini thing, he can't really bring it back, and it's kind of hard to turn it off once it's gone in without there being a pilot and a miniature one. Doesn't really work. A couple of his friends, think it's mainly just a sleight of hand magician trick. So he decides he's going to take his experiment to the next level and actually travel into the future in his full-scale model. As he does, he sees what happens in the future from World War I to World War II to a, at that time, hypothetical third war. Because this film was made during the Cold War, so the whole threat of a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States was still looming over people's heads like a curtain that could come down at any minute. And when George reaches the 60s, he sees this hammer come down, and he travels into the far future, into the year 802-701. And there he finds that humans still exist, but they have developed into 2 separate species. We have the Eloi and the Morlocks. The Eloi are docile humans that don't really have much ambition other than, sustaining life. They eat, they frolic around a little bit, but they don't really have any ambition, no curiosity, no drive. They don't really have self-preservation. And the Morlocks are basically the worst aspects of humanity realized. Now, we don't see the Morlocks until the last part of the film, but you kind of sense that they're there, and it does work in the build-up. Earlier you see parts of it, but you don't see a whole one. So when you finally see one, it's a creepy moment. Probably had a bigger impact when the film came out in 1960, but even for a modern audience, it's still there. Now, George, of course, when he sees what humanity has become, he doesn't believe it. He really is angered by it. But there's one point where he yells at one of the male Eloi when they show him books, centuries of humans pushing their boundaries, and for what? For it all to just become a handful of dust. George's presence and his actions and his view on the future of humanity comes to a head at the end when he has to go down into the Morlock's lair to rescue some Eloi who are brought in there, particularly one named Weena, who he develops a romantic interest in, which is one of the minor changes from book to movie, but it works. While down there, he discovers the horrible truth about the Morlocks, and that one of the worst aspects of humanity, at least by society standards, is realizing them, and that is cannibalism. They don't eat other Morlocks, they eat the Elois, which explains a lot of their, for lack of a better term, sheepish tendencies. Now, of course, down there he's trying to save them, he's fighting Morlocks, and his actions cause one of the other male Eloi, and then after that a group of them, who before were typical Eloi, sheep in human form, to break the mold. No matter what the circumstances, the human spirit can triumph. The film received 1 Academy Award nomination for Best Special Effects, which it took home, and the effects were done by Gene Warren and Tim Barr. While they are dated by modern standards and sensibilities, for the time period that they were released and made, the late 50s, early 60s, they look pretty good and they still hold up when you look at it through that lens. Some of the hot lava effects don't really look as well. Makes me wonder how someone looking at that film back then would have thought. It probably would have looked a lot more impressive back then. It's just one aspect of the special effects that hasn't aged as well. Funny thing about that is the hot lava was actually made using oatmeal. I could kind of tell a little bit when watching it. It's like a couple parts, yeah, that looks like oatmeal. I do like the stop motion used during the time lapse. It's a little herky-jerky at moments, but that's the point. It's a time travel time lapse. If there's one moment that really comes to mind, it's when you see an apple go from a flower to full bloom, and from that part alone you're like, yep, this movie definitely deserved the Oscar for special effects. And there's another little scene involving a mannequin, being dressed and redressed as he's going into the future with the different styles, and just George sitting there watching. George is played in the film by Rod Taylor. Considering his character is the time traveler, he has the most screen time, and he does an excellent job both with his dialogue and physically for the scenes where he doesn't really have anything. And of course, considering that most of the movie is him telling this story to his dinner guests, his narration is pretty good as well. Other than this, the only other films I've specifically seen him in is a childhood favorite, 101 Dalmatians, and Hitchcock's film The Birds. And he does a pretty good job in those three. It's a nice little trifecta of films for him to be associated with. Sadly, he passed away last year. A secondary one would be Yvette Mimieux, who played Weena the Eloy. She did okay for what she had to do. I haven't seen her other work, so I can't really compare her performance in this film to another one, but most of her performance comes across as intentional, especially considering how her race is. What I've gathered, her performance actually got better as the film went around, so they went back and actually refilmed some of her earlier stuff, which makes me wonder how her earlier scenes would have come across. Would they have come across as wooden? I guess like when you compare Arnold's performance in Hercules in New York with his later films, where he's like, I am tired of all the same faces, tired of all the same things. Wooden. Another interesting thing is that Yvette was actually underage when she started filming her part in this film. She turned 18 during the shoot, and during that time when she was 17, she was not legally supposed to be working a full schedule, but she did anyway. And this was supposed to be a union film. Now, the last actor of note in the film is Alan Young, who played David and James Philby, depending on what time period George visited. And considering he plays two separate characters, he does a pretty good job. Other films I know him from is The Cat from Outer Space, which was a childhood favorite of mine, The Great Mouse Detective, and of course he's the voice of Scrooge McDuck. Of course, other people might know him as Wilbur from the classic show Mr. Ed. Since I have not seen that show, other than like clips here and there, I cannot really give an opinion on him in that show one way or another. In conclusion, this is an all-around great film, and definitely the epitome of a sci-fi classic. George Powell's direction is great, the cinematography for the scenes is great, special effects, like I mentioned, are top-notch and definitely deserve the Academy Award. The set design is magnificent. I really do love the time and effort that was put into sets back then. I mean, there still is now, but there's a charm to looking at the sets from the 30s to the 60s, and even into the 70s. There's a charm to them that Hollywood just doesn't recreate anymore. Like I said, the acting by Rod and then our other supporting cast pretty good and really nail home their characters. And the film is a little under 2 hours at 103 minutes, so it's not a long film, and it has a pretty good pace. The film was made for about $750,000. When you do the inflation thing, it would probably be like modern money, probably like 30 million, give or take, which you can really see just from the sets and the special effects alone where a lot of that money went. And it made about 2.6 million in early 60s money. Pretty good gross. That'd probably be like the modern equivalent of what, like a $200 million gross, give or take. Definitely deserved it, and it definitely deserves the legacy that it has. It definitely comes with my recommendation if you are a fan of time travel films, sci-fi films, and 60s cinema in general. And I give it a rating of a 4.5 out of 5 stars.